Hi everyone, my name is Connor Colgan, Product Manager here at ClearDATA. Today we're going to talk about visualizing healthcare compliance in the public cloud. And when we think about compliance overall, the visualization or the demonstration of that is really important. So what ClearDATA focuses on is helping organizations ensure their compliance in the public cloud. So when we think of public cloud, we talk about AWS or Azure or Google, and ClearDATA can help customers and healthcare organizations accelerate their cloud journey by providing a automated set of tools that helps enforce and ensure compliance. Not only does the automation help enforce the compliance, things like encryption at rest or encryption at motion, but we also provide a compliance dashboard that we call Comply that allows you to demonstrate and prove that compliance. That's really important when you think about talking to your leadership or the OCR or your auditors, or probably most importantly, your customers and your patients. So today I'm going to walk through what the Comply dashboard looks like and what kind of data it can show and help visualize. And I'll also walk through a demonstration of a couple of the automated safeguards that help enforce that compliance. Go ahead and share my screen. So what you'll see here is this compliance dashboard shows a list of the public cloud accounts that you may have. Today we're going to talk about AWS in particular, but if you had Azure subscriptions or Google projects, they would also show up in this tiled list. And you can look at the compliance score of each of these accounts. Again, these demonstration accounts, we have some that probably represent more real-world data and others that contain a significant number of failures. So when I click into an account, it gives me a lot more information about that particular account. This one is an example of what we call ClearDATA Comply with managed services. This is an additional set of services that you can purchase to help accelerate that cloud journey with additional features such as managed antivirus and a support team that you can contact for assistance with the cloud. We also ensure things like backup and system patching that help offload a lot of that undifferentiated heavy lifting that's still involved with work to ensure compliance. And when I look at this account, we can break down the compliance based on things like compute or storage or database. And we can also look at the safeguards and what actions have occurred in this account. So this is a quick snapshot view of what this account looks like. I'll take you through what you would demonstrate as a report capability. So when we think about accounts in the world of Amazon, you typically have one account for a workload. So in this example, I'm looking at the compliance of one particular account. You can see the overall score is 85%, and that breaks down based on the Amazon services. This gives you a much more detailed view of which particular services you are running inside that account and the compliance as it relates to those services. So we think about EKS or the Elastic Kubernetes service, as well as Kinesis through EFS, Redshift, S3, and EC2. And this is a really powerful report because it gives you the capability to turn to an auditor when they ask, show me the compliance of your cloud environment. You can say, here's the services we're running. Here are the particular, what we call safeguards, as well as mapping that safeguard to a specific requirement. So if I think of Amazon S3, which is their cloud storage platform, there's a large number of safeguards or controls that you're going to want to have in place for that. You want to ensure that all the data that is stored in that environment is encrypted at rest. You want to ensure that all connections to that bucket are encrypted. And you want to make sure that you're not opening up the bucket to unintended users. So you want to make sure it's not publicly available. And when we look at that, we consider that to be what we call a group of safeguards for S3. So in addition to simply the report that we provide that gives you the compliance score, is it compliant or is it not, we also provide a large amount of information around the safeguards that make up those technical controls. In this example for S3, we have 12 controls, safeguards, And in the world of healthcare, all of these controls have to meet regulations that are interpretive, especially HIPAA and high tech. They are not what we call prescriptive regulations or prescriptive standards. They don't define how you must do something. It's just that you have to do it. So if we take backups, for example, there's no requirement that says you have to back up your data every day and it has to be retained for this long, or audit logging that's up on the screen. It doesn't say you have to keep these logs and you have to put them here. It's more along the lines of you have to have a policy to ensure that you have access to the logs and you're keeping them at for a reasonable amount of time. And the challenge there for a lot of healthcare organizations, especially as they've moved to newer technologies and look at these cloud-based services, is they don't know how to interpret that as it relates to the cloud. So part of what ClearDATA provides here in the dashboard is an interpretation of the technical control mapped to a standard. So in this case, with audit logging, we're ensuring that the S3 audit logs are kept, and we very clearly outline our interpretation of exactly how this maps to these standards. So we're ensuring all the necessary logging is enabled as we interpret it, and we're retaining it. And then we show you which HIPAA CFR or GDPR article or ISO standard or NIST standard that these all apply to. And that is really helpful and information for you to go again to the auditors as well as your customers and your leadership and anyone that asks, because you can say, I'm using the S3 service or I'm using the RDS and Amazon's compute services, and here's all the controls I have in place, as well as, and here's how they are mapping to this regulation. Every healthcare entity has to ensure and prove that they're meeting these regulations, and this helps ease that burden. So that's how you look at what the reports look like. You can take the reports and say, this is exactly my compliance in that cloud. Now, the automation that drives this also helps enforce that. So we have a page in here called Remediations, and I'll show you exactly what that looks like. In the world of Amazon, we'll continue with an example with S3. Now, if I were to create what's called a S3 bucket, that is what they call sort of a file system for S3, and it allows you to create and store data. Now, if I were to create this bucket, and I'll create it using just the standard requirements. So I'm not going to change anything, but if we look at this screen, you'll see immediately that there are certain changes that need to be made to help ensure this bucket is capable of hosting and processing PHI. For example, default encryption, this automatically encrypts those objects when they're stored. That's unchecked by default. If we look at server access logging, thinking back to the audit log example from a moment ago, these are disabled. So I'm not going to turn those on, and we'll just go through and create the bucket. Again, this is as if there is a standard or a regular user coming in and creating a bucket. Again, thinking of organizations that may be new to the cloud, or even if there was a bucket made by mistake and using those defaults, the versioning is not enabled, the encryption is not enabled. And this is when we detect the bucket being created, that's when we kick off the evaluation. So our system has detected that this bucket was just provisioned, and then we evaluated it against all of those safeguards that I showed here. So we're taking a look at the bucket and ensuring that audit logging's on, encryption's on. All 12 of these controls are in place, and that's what we call an evaluation. If any of these controls are not met, we will actively remediate the bucket, and in the example of S3, we will make changes that will turn on audit logging and will turn on encryption and versioning. So you'll see in a minute, it takes about 3 to 4 minutes to run for S3, but the settings will actually change that encryption has turned on. And then we'll notify you in the portal underneath the remediations. We will let you know that there was a bucket created that was not compliant, it did not meet these controls, and it did not meet that, and therefore was remediated in this manner. And that's going to be an ongoing thing. So as not only as when new things are created. So when a bucket is created, it immediately is remediated, but it's monitored for ongoing changes too. It's really important that over time, you can ensure the ongoing compliance. And if there's changes, you'll be able to showcase that and prove that they were remediated based on the change. So it's known as event-driven. So when there's a change that occurs, we respond accordingly, and we actively ensure the ongoing compliance. So if this bucket was changed, for example, if encryption was on initially, but then it was accidentally turned off, we would reevaluate it, and then we would turn that encryption back on. Now, we also take a couple other stances. It depends on the service. Today, in the AWS world, we support about 20 services, roughly the same in Azure and Google as well. And all those services have certain remediation and evaluation actions. Again, it's really important to think of we're taking these controls based on the standards where we start, and we map those back to the technical control. And then based on the requirements there, we take the appropriate remediation action. Now, we also do evaluations. And think of an evaluation or an alert as an action that occurred but was not remediated. So, for example, there are a large number of CIS, or Center for Internet Standards, best practices that should be applied to your cloud accounts. For example, if there's an unauthorized API call, or if there's a bucket change, or if you manage user access policies that goes against best practices, our system will alert you of those. And these are actions that you can take that would help you get better aligned with those best practices. And that way you can ensure that in an ongoing manner, you're responding accordingly to issues that may impact your compliance. And what all these come together, the reporting, the remediations, the evaluations, all of us come together to help you build what we call a culture of compliance. And if I show you what that looks like from a certain report standpoint, this is an environment trend report. So this is an example of a trend, compliance trend of one particular account over time. And what's really important here to think about is you will see ebbs and flows in the compliance. Regardless of how your system is set up, it's very hard to achieve and obtain 100% compliance in an ongoing basis. Systems fail, antivirus agents stop, backups don't work for whatever reason. But what's really critical is that you showcase a response. So if there is a dip in compliance, you would respond accordingly, and there should be a corresponding increase. So for example, if we go through this report, we can see an overall compliance over time. We can look at things like backups or intrusion detection. You'll see here there's a drop when agents stop working, but then there's a corresponding increase. And that's what's really important, is that you can actively prove and show to your auditors or the OCR or your customers that you are actively monitoring not only for operational issues or trying to detect, like if a server goes down or a CPU is high, but you're looking at it from a purely compliance standpoint too, so that you can say, I'm watching for this CFR to address malware in the case of intrusion detection, and I'm responding accordingly. And that way you can, again, prove that culture of compliance. And this trend report showcases that across all of the Amazon services over time. And that is how you really build and prove and visualize that compliance on top of a public cloud. Are there any questions? Let me just check the chat. All right. If there's no questions at this time, I really appreciate it. Cloud?